Hey there, wondrous ones. Darren Austin Hall here with another wisdom transmission. And as you can see, I'm wearing my fleece because Canada, here I am back in Ontario, Canada. In the north, I'm in Muskoka area and getting some little prophetic whispers of autumn coming in. And although you may just hear the cicadas in the background. So when the sun comes out, it's summer, and when it goes behind the clouds, it feels like autumn. So I'm just enjoying having my fleece on in the moment. And it's been really wonderful to be back here on my Holy Shift tour. I've been doing lots of amazing events. And yeah, for this week's wisdom transmission, I want to share something that's very important to me. And this is something that I feel I may put forth as a workshop as well, because the subject matter I want to dive into, I feel, is very pertinent to our reality and where things are shifting. So what I want to discuss is this whole notion that I believe, my perspective of the new earth that we're entering into. And just to really contextualize, the new earth is not just some like fanciful new age idea. Some of my First Nations indigenous teachers spoke about the new earth, and they spoke about it being a time when humanity undergoes a great spiritual awakening and starts to realize that big changes need to happen, foremost through our personal lives and our own individual life force expression, but then also culturally. And a lot of those changes need to be in coincidence with natural law, with the ways of nature, as we return ourselves to the garden, which is a mythological idea of returning to a kind of utopian relationship with the earth, or rather with the appropriate relationship with the earth and nature. A utopia is inevitable because the laws of nature are actually always guiding us to an excellent expression of ourselves. And nature provides, Mother Earth provides. You know, I've been saying a lot lately, there's so much abundance out there, abundance coaching, manifest your dream reality and such, and people still focus on abundance being something to do with material wealth. Whereas I believe true abundance is just recognizing the fertility, the endless fertility of the land, especially in the wake of how much we've devastated, misused Mother Earth, have disrespected this relationship, and yet she perpetually still gives. I mean, what better signifier, representation rather, of unconditional love? But really, when you plant seeds in the land, if you have grown your own food ever, you know that you plant seeds in the land and it just gives so much in abundance, and often too much for just one family or one person. I remember years ago, my brother-in-law started growing kale in the box gardens in their backyard, and whenever I would visit, he'd be like giving me bags of kale because he's like, it's just too much for us. And that's amazing. And of course, in our modern world, where many of us are living in cities, we've been sort of cut off from acknowledging the true abundance of nature. But really, in the new earth, I believe that a big thing that needs to shift is that wisdom itself needs to be valued more than material wealth. Wisdom is the new gold, as I've shared. And this is a shift that needs to take place now. And this will probably take some time because there's a lot of things to finesse there. And we don't want to create antagonism, as I know there is, you know, a lot of civil unrest brewing right now because the economic system is pretty broken. It's going through a lot of transitions, and, you know, the have-nots, you know, have ire towards the haves and vice versa. There's fear, and, you know, and the whole system of money, you know, one could argue it's quite unnatural in itself. I mean, nature doesn't use money. And then you have these, interesting vanguards in our culture like Elon Musk talking about how AI and robotics are going to revolutionize the world so much and do away with the labor force that there won't even be a need for money perhaps in our lifetime. So lots of interesting things, but truly wisdom is more important than material wealth. And this is something that I got a download about 5 or 6 years ago when I had moved to Costa Rica during the time of pandemia. And I started to see during that time of seismic shift, there was a lot of people moving down to Costa Rica, for example, where I was living, and there was a lot of people bringing wealth. There was, a lot of crypto, newly minted, wealthy people because there was such a bull run during that time. And people were coming with this mindset that they wanted to actually do some positive things in the world with their money, which is really, really great. But one of the problems that I've seen is that often the people who have the true wisdom in the world, the wisdom that is needed now, the wisdom keepers, the visionaries, the ones that have the visions that are needed for the world, the new ideas of new culture, new art, new healing arts, new systems of even societal organization, architects of eco-village ideas. A lot of these people tend to not prioritize material wealth. They may still do well, they may still succeed, they may still be able to sustain a very comfortable material life. But chances are most of these people are not prioritizing amassing a great fortune of funds, of money. Now it's getting hot because the sun is out, so I may just take off my fleece. And I would say that is a merit of these people because, if you're a healer and you're devoted to healing others, then probably your priority is honing your craft and being of great service and helping people out. This is why I've often found it very awkward in our present reality. There seems to be this new trend among social media influencers and just people who are using social media where people are bragging about how much money they're making. And I find this very strange because I was raised by the values of never sharing how much money you're making, because it's boasting and it makes other people feel badly. And it can also, as I've delved into the energetics of that, I find it can also, feed, maybe the bird is giving me an affirmation here, the spirit of the flying ones. It can also feed a sense of greed. And we have to remember, a lot of the great spiritual sages, and I'm thinking right now foremost of Yeshua, of Jesus, he says in the New Testament that it's not money that is the root of all evil. It's the love of money that is the root of all evil. And that is the greed to always want more, to want more. And if you've ever amassed wealth in your life, the strange thing about it is it starts to create actually more insecurity than security. You start to feel like, oh, now I have all these possessions that I've bought. Now I have to manage all of those. There's more attachments that I have to be involved in. It can make life a lot more complex. And this is why there's a lot of wealthy people who are actually very mentally unwell, depressed, without purpose. Like, why have I amassed all this wealth? Because the systems that we live in, the capitalist model, really presents us this notion that being materially wealthy is an end in itself. It's like once I've become, a millionaire or a billionaire, I've won the game, and yay, that's like the whole point of this, isn't it? But time and time again, people who do garner substantial riches find themselves feeling vacuous, feeling empty, feeling maybe they've sacrificed so much of their time and energy that they've sacrificed the relationship with their family, they've sacrificed their spirituality, the relationship with God, goddess, or whatever we want to configure that notion of a higher reality with. So a lot of the wealthy are now going into healing, and you see this. Costa Rica has become like a nexus for people of all manner of class and wealth status to go and heal. There's a lot of beautiful retreats and natural medicines and natural beauty of the land. But all over the world, the wellness industry is growing tremendously because I think more and more people are realizing that we are in a crisis of consciousness. And as we start to wield powerful things like AI, if our consciousness is not rectified and healthy and in alignment, we could do some really disastrous things to ourselves and to nature. But anywho, back to the wisdom over wealth, material wealth idea. So the people who are holding the visions, the mystical, the healers, the artists, the whole archetypal theory of the starving artist, and a lot of that is because creatives spend so much time in relationship to their art, in making art. And when it comes to strategizing business, it feels like a bit of like doldrums. And people, just want to be making art all the time. And this is why there was, a great tradition of benefactors and philanthropists of the arts throughout the ages, because it was recognized how valuable art was to our reality. As Nietzsche, the great German philosopher, said, life without music wouldn't be worth living. And so the wealthy who had a true noble sense of the reality knew this, and so they would make sure the artists were well paid and sustained so they could really concentrate on giving this incredible service, this incredible gift to culture of the arts. And so nowadays, what I'm perceiving in reality that I feel is a bit problematic is, well, first of all, if you know anything about the economic landscape of the world, you know that since the pandemic especially, which is quite suspicious, there was one of the biggest transfers of wealth during the pandemic, and the middle class has been like just evaporating since then. And there's just such a ginormous gap between the wealth, those who have and the have-nots in the world. And it's getting more and more crippling. The economy, the unemployment rate here in Canada, it's atrocious. People are living in tents in the cities now. There's this big crush happening, and it should not be like that. We should be interdependent. We should be taking care of ourselves, of each other. In my song Mystical Currencies, there's this refrain that I want to build a world where if you fall through the cracks, you fall into another's arms. You don't have this sense that you're going to fall into the abyss and just, start living on the streets and everyone's like embarrassed to even look at you because there's just this unconscious recognition. This is unfair. This shouldn't be like this. My God, what is this madness? So the world is craving new visions. We can't continue going this way. We can't continue in a predatory capitalistic system. And you see this in spirituality and wellness. We're having a spiritual awakening as a species in a capitalist culture, and it's super fucking clumsy. It's causing lots of just strange stuff where people are becoming self-aggrandized and they're selling themselves. They're selling their whole life. You see this a lot on social media now. People's their whole life has become a product. And that doesn't sit well with me. I don't think that's good for our mental health. And also there's this clumsy thing where spirituality and wellness should primarily be, about some kind of selfless service, right? And I mean, I'm in this too. I sell things, my spiritual and wellness things I sell. I try and keep things open in the sense that if I have the power over an event, if I'm doing it at a space where I'm just paying a rental rate or there's an agreement with the owner, I always have this agreement that finances are never a barrier for coming to one of my experiences or my services. We can always work something out. I just feel that should be fundamental for everyone on the planet. So, but what I'm seeing right now is that there's a lot of beautiful people who are having tremendous visions about what is needed in the world, new educational models, new eco-villages, and they don't have enough money to really do the big projects, to make tectonic shifts that are needed to happen in culture. And there's now this growing gap where you have trillionaires, Elon Musk is now a trillionaire. I mean, why do you need even $1 billion? I mean, it's just to me, these are transgressions of natural law. You don't see anywhere else in nature where something like material wealth, like money, is hoarded as much as our species hoards things. And there should be some kind of cap on it. And I know, there's all these naysayers about, socialism's bad, and capitalism creates this beautiful motivation through free enterprise for ambition to have these infinite runways to expand. And if we didn't have that, if people had a cap on their wealth, they'd not be so ambitious. And I want to counter that. I think part of the problem is what Jung was saying. We've become a mythless culture. We've lost a sense of the mythic, of these grand narratives that would, in ancient times, rally and marshal the culture towards higher collective purposes. And we don't have these higher collective purposes right now. I think one of the biggest purposes that our politicians should be helping to render is our reintegration with the earth, what some shamanic practitioners call the re-enchantment, this beautiful sense that when we return to the world of nature, nature is just teeming with natural mysticism, natural magic. The true AI for me is animistic intelligence, realizing that all of these things behind me, these trees, they're organic, they're sentient. The Druids, I have the symbol of the Celtic Alwyn on my arm. The Druids were the people of the oak. They would have all of their meetings, all of their big decisions as a culture were done in oak groves, because they recognized they had to speak to the oaks as well to make their decisions. These are things that are so out of our current worldview, but when you hear these tales, there's something there, there's a hook, there's something magical, wow, that's so beautiful. Speaking to the trees as if our allies, our friends, even our elders. There's something profound there that touches, an ancestral memory in us. So, I really push back against that. I think if the real problem is that we've lost the canopy of really strong collective purposes that would be directing people, where their ambition may even be more powerful, because they know they're serving a greater good. They're serving, selflessly serving life. So I push back against that, and I do feel that what needs to happen on the planet right now is that people who do have a lot of material wealth, there needs to be, everyone should be honored. If you have amassed a fortune, whether it's millions or billions or trillions of dollars, that's taken a lot of initiative. That's taken a lot of discipline, a lot of strategy, a lot of work. And that needs to be honored as well, that has been that person's proclivity, that has been their dharma even, that's their love, to run a profitable business, to amass wealth. That's awesome. And we also need to recognize that there are people who have also transmitted just as much vigor in their life force energy towards being amazing artists, towards being amazing healers. And maybe some of them have become super successful financially, but maybe a lot of them haven't, because they haven't prioritized that. And maybe they don't feel that they need, a lot of material wealth, especially if they're genuinely spiritual people. Spiritual people tend to not feel so fixated on amassing things. There's this sort of renunciatory quality to some forms of spirituality. I don't want to make broad strokes here, actually. So some people who are spiritual choose not, to amass tremendous amounts of things. They're more interested in having substantial wealth on an interior level. The quality of their vibration, the quality of their personality, their virtues, their ethical nature. And that's very beautiful. And that also needs to be recognized, in equanimity. These are both different pathways. But now we're in this big crisis on the earth. We have the environmental crisis that to me is still the biggest crisis on the planet. We don't have to get into the whole hubbub of climate change, but there's evidently a lot of chaos happening in the environment. We can't drink clean water anymore. There's things like AI data centers that are emerging that are going to have an even more horrific environmental impact. There's a huge mental health crisis on the planet. There's a crisis of truth. No one knows what is real or true anymore. There's just a lot of problems on the planet, and it's seemingly getting more and more chaotic. And it's driving people a little nuts, I would say, especially given the financial pinch that people can't, appropriately put even food on the table. When you start to shake the root of your being, the root chakra, which has to do with consolidating secure finances, if that's unstable, the whole tree is shaking. And I have been, and I believe I'm one of these people too, someone who carries visions of what the future could be, who has spent years, decades, like considering, contemplating, speaking to other visionaries, other wisdom keepers about, what changes could happen in the world. But unfortunately, a lot of us don't have the financial means to do that. So I would just love to see this beautiful network starting to emerge where there's an interdependent situation where people who have great wealth, and I know because I've met people of great wealth, and I work with people who work with people of great wealth, and there seems to be this growing spirit of like, I don't want to buy another, big house. I want to give my money towards a vision, and help it. I don't even need to be interested in return of interest or ROI. I can be an angel investor, and we need more of this spirit. Things would change super fast on the planet if all the visionaries, because we're in such a visionary age, there are so many visions coming to the planet right now. And a big part of the stumbling block is the financial system is still so stagnant in terms of moving funding and energy towards the visions to happen. And another thing that I've been seeing, and this may be the most challenging part of my talk, is I've been also witnessing this psychological sort of phenomena where people who have tremendous amounts of wealth, who maybe run businesses, and then they have some sort of spiritual awakening. And I see this a lot in Costa Rica because it's such a hive for plant medicine therapies, for example. And then they all of a sudden get visions themselves, and they, buy the land, they start building these big projects. But because they're so used to being the CEO, to being the captain of the industry, of the business, they, and capitalism is very predatory in this way. It's highly competitive. It's about crushing your opponents. It's about like amassing more and more wealth. It's like kind of cutthroat. But when it comes to like making, an eco-village project, for example, or a healing arts center, that's about marrying, the values of capitalism, the needed amassing of wealth with selfless services, with selfless activities, with the creation of the arts, with culture. And time again, I've seen in places like Costa Rica and other places that the wealthy are not so highly skilled at things like building a true sacred culture, a healing culture. And there's a bit of an ego diminishing that needs to happen for them to really start to work in tandem with a team where wisdom keepers are elevated to such a role where they can step forward and be funded to steer the cultural aspect that is needed. Because we need culture on the planet right now. We need a healing and a sacred culture. And I'll give you an example of an anecdote that I received. And I've shared this before, and if you're one of my inner circle of friends, you've probably heard this story many times. But years ago when I was in Costa Rica, I was involved in potentially co-stewarding one of my favorite retreat centers in the land. And my friend who was the owner of the retreat center asked me to go and meet with a real estate mogul who had come to visit the property, and he had just, I think, had some big spiritual experience, whether it was an ayahuasca ceremony, I'm not sure. So I went to go and speak to this man, and he was, a nice and respectful man, but, our conversation at the beginning was fairly one-sided. He just started, speaking very vociferously, very passionately about, visions he was receiving about the world and spirituality. And, no disrespect, but a lot of it I had kind of heard being in the spiritual, realm as long as I had. It wasn't nothing new that I was hearing, but I was like holding space for this man as he was, excitedly sharing all these epiphanies, which were beautiful to behold. But it got to a point about, 15 minutes into the talk where I was starting to feel uncomfortable because I was like, wow, is this guy even going to talk about this retreat center? Does he want to be involved? Like, when is he going to ask questions? When is he going to be open to maybe listening to my perspective? And I remember just getting this huge download, and this like revelation just hit me like a thunderbolt. And the revelation was, you're richer than him. And I remember sort of being like, huh? But I'm like, this guy's like so wealthy. Like, I have money, but I don't have the same amount of money as he does. And then the voice doubled down and it said, "You're richer than him because you've got more wisdom." And I was like, wow. And I just sat with that energetic, and I instantly realized that I was actually deferring to him. I had set up this hierarchy where, because he had the money, I was playing submissive. I was acting less than. And when that revelation came through, part of me felt this vigorous energy overcome me, and I felt this self-assurance and this confidence fill me. And I very politely interjected, and I simply shared my perspective on whatever this man was sharing about his spiritual, notions. And he kind of looked at me quite bewildered, and his eyes got quite big. And he said, "Wow, that was like some amazing wisdom. Like, I think you're my teacher." He literally said, "I think you're my teacher." And I deflected that and I said, "Well, I don't know if I'm your teacher, but, thank you for appreciating what I had to share." And it was just interesting to notice that instantly the hierarchy had shifted. And I'm not interested in what are called dominator hierarchies, which I think capitalism has really imposed on the world, where you have a CEO who stays there, or a political leader. I'm more interested in flexible hierarchies, which is more natural, where in a random moment, someone may present expertise that thrusts them to the elevated position. And then there's the humility of constantly coming back to the circle, and then someone else has an opportunity to stand for it. That's how I facilitate. That's one of my main skills or values that I bring to facilitation, is that nimble sense of hierarchy. But that sort of hit me, and I was like, wow, this is huge. The wisdom are the wealthiest. The wisest are the wealthiest, rather. Wisdom is more valuable than gold. This is what's happening right now in the new earth. So if you're watching this and you're resonating with this, and you are of someone who has skillfully amassed, material wealth, and power to you. And now is the time to humble ourselves and realize there are people out there who have the wisdom, who have the visions, the culture. I've seen projects come and go in Costa Rica, and a lot of the projects that come and go, it's been a lack of really reaching out and trying to find the team, the appropriate wisdom keepers that can really come forward. And you see this a lot with indigenous peoples, because a lot of the indigenous peoples I've hung out with, the great wisdom keepers, the great teachers, it's that old adage that the greatest teachers, you're not going to find them on Instagram. You're not going to find them living in a big mansion anywhere. They're often super grassroots. They're living humbly. But when you see them and you meet them and they speak, the transmission is so authentic that it just powers through all of your own ego, and you feel it instantly. There's an immediate resonance that this person is holding something of significant value to the world. Wisdom really transmits. It's not something that you can fake. So my hope is that in this new earth that we're moving into, that this value can really come forward, that wisdom is the new gold. Wisdom is what is needed more than ever. And I hope more and more that people who have the visions, the sensitives, the artists, the cultural visionaries who are receiving these tremendous visions right now, that they are connected to the right people who have the funding so that their visions can come into reality, because we still live in a capitalistic system. I think it will shift, but right now money does still talk. And if we really want to bring forth this whole new earth, this beautiful world I know many of us are already dreaming, that are feeling alive in our hearts, this is one of the big changes that needs to take place. There needs to be more of a transfer of wealth in a loving way, in a rightful way, in a graceful way. I'm not interested in some kind of French Revolution where we're putting the guillotine to people who have material wealth. It's more about coming to this understanding, yes, of course. And at the end of the day, the best case scenario is probably this beautiful teamwork, because the artists and the visionaries often don't have the meticulous understanding of how to architect a business plan and how to, create the landing gear. But they have the revelations, and they know how to steer. They know how to run amazing ceremonies, amazing events, amazing rituals, which, let's face it, that's week in and week out. That's what makes culture, a village, the world tick, is having people who create these beautiful cultural experiences. So power to that, divine power to that. I think this is a really exciting thing. I hope you resonate. Share with me in the comments what you feel about this, and if there's any other ideas you have, on this front of wisdom really being elevated, the wisdom keepers, the cultural visionaries in this beautiful new earth that we're all living in. I'd love to hear. So sending you all so much love as this beautiful golden sun of infinite light shines down. Wherever you are, I trust, I hope you are well. I send you big love, and may wisdom rule your soul, and may wisdom be more freely released onto the world to help us bring forth this beautiful new earth that is already beating alive, newly born in all of our hearts. Many blessings.